Thanks again, Kate. Taking time out of your, I know, very busy schedule. It's always a pleasure to have you in the region. As mentioned throughout today, really, the theme for today's event, breakthrough. Those in this room know that in business, breakthroughs come in many forms. But for all, there's usually a common thread: innovation, risk, determination, and a commitment to a bolder future vision. Likewise, progressive communities must develop strategic, thoughtful, and over-the-horizon approaches to break through challenges and realize opportunities. To provide his thoughts for a stronger future for our region, please welcome CenterState CEO, President Rob Simpson.
Good afternoon. Thanks again so much for being here. I feel like I have a lot that I want to say today. But first, a few important thank yous. Certainly to Jim Fox and to all of our members, those of you who are here today, for your partnership and for your unwavering support of the work that we do. To my amazing wife, Corinne Ribble, you always remind me of what is most important in work and in life. And certainly to Kate Adams and Honeywell and Onondaga County Executive Joni Mahoney for all you have done to engage with our community over the course of the last decade and more to return our lake to its rightful place as a natural, economic, and iconic asset for our entire region. So be honest for a moment. How many of you could roll back the clock 15 years and envision a lake restored? Clean enough for regular regattas, safe enough to swim, beautiful enough to serve as the backdrop for our new amphitheater. It was impossible, they said. So deadly and dangerous for so long that ice harvesting was banned in 1901, fishing banned in 1940, the most polluted lake in America, one of the top 2 or 3 most polluted lakes in the world. A lake lost to a tragic history of industrialization and urbanization. And who could blame that cynicism? My grandfather, who worked at GE at Electronics Parkway back in the 1950s, he surely felt that way. He died 15 years ago, never having known the lake as anything other than an eyesore, as anything other than to keep his son, my father, away from. How many generations of Central New Yorkers have been imprinted by that very same stigma? It's amazing, really, when you think about it, how deeply impactful those actions, in some cases taken more than 100 years ago, have been to our community's entire growth and development. Advocates like Sam Sage of the Atlantic States Legal Foundation and scientists like ESF Professor Steve Effler were among the first to draw our attention to the staggering environmental costs of our industrial legacy. But what of the economic and the social costs? Generations of children and families who could not swim in Onondaga Lake, tourism and recreational industries that once thrived around the water suddenly run ashore, development patterns that in almost every major city of the world embrace, amplify, celebrate their waterfronts that were stifled as the community literally turned their backs to the water. Most pernicious, perhaps, the deep-seated, lasting psychological impact of a community forced to marginalize and/or ignore its most basic asset, the reason for this community's very existence, the source of its life, the foundation for its history, and the history of entire cultures, civilizations, and our democratic form of government. Imagine New York City without the Hudson River, New Orleans without the Mississippi, Amsterdam or Venice without canals, Paris without the Seine. But yet that's exactly how we came to define ourselves: Syracuse without Onondaga Lake. Our imagery, our brand, the message that we projected to the world for too long was one of a city and a region with its back to the water. Play that out in your mind for a second and think about all the many ways that the marginalization of Onondaga Lake may have contributed to this pervasive pessimism about our present condition and, worse yet, about our future. For more than a century, we have been taught that our greatest asset is, in fact, a deficit. And changing that circumstance is impossible, they have said. It can't be done. It won't be done. Don't even try, not in my lifetime. Tragically, it's a metaphor for so many community conversations that we continue to have today. I mean, change on any scale is hard, right? But change on the scale of the Onondaga Lake ecosystem, that's astoundingly difficult. There were obstacles, bitter disagreements, difficult choices, a multitude of interests to navigate, concerned citizens, the court system, Onondaga County, Honeywell, the Onondaga Nation, and more. It took vision, a long-term view of return on investment, the willingness to have difficult and sometimes painful conversations, and a steadfast commitment to reject the course of cynicism and the inertia of the status quo. And while the work in and around the lake is certainly not finished, it has reached a point where we can no longer say, it can't be done. What once seemed impossible is now a dawning reality. What only a few dared to even dream is now within reach. And as we look through the lens of history, this project serves as a reminder and a model for what can be achieved when we re-envision our deficits as assets. After decades of hoping and pushing and partnerships, we broke through. Now, that breakthrough moment is something that we all strive for. It is, I am sure, why so many of you do the work that you do. And I know I speak for almost all of us at CenterState CEO when I say that chasing the breakthrough moments for our community is so much of what drives us. Frankly, it's the example of the business community that gives us hope. It's your leadership, your individual and collective commitment to breaking through that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that big things, transformative things, are in fact possible. Take, for example, iCore Therapeutics, a leading-edge biotechnology company in Lafayette, New York. And yes, you heard me, a leading-edge biotechnology company in Lafayette, New York. 4 years ago, Kelsey Moody, an upstate medical university student, started the company by filling his living room on Tip Hill with used research equipment. How many times do you think Kelsey was discouraged from chasing his vision? Don't buy that microscope on eBay. Let's go out. You're too young to start a business. Others have tried to cure these diseases and have failed, so you will too. You'll never succeed as a biotechnology firm in Lafayette, New York. And oh, by the way, taxes in New York State are too high, so if you must try, go somewhere else. Kelsey didn't stop. He kept going, and he found partners. And I am proud of the fact that we are one of them, making a $75,000 investment in his vision through our Grants for Growth program in 2015. And today, out of state-of-the-art laboratories that he built himself, he has a growing workforce and is on the verge of human clinical trials for therapeutics to treat macular degeneration, a currently incurable eye disease that leads to partial loss of vision and affects as many as 15 million Americans. Or take Biospherics in Parrish, New York. In an old school building in Oswego County, the company makes machines that are being used around the world to create medical breakthroughs, advance research, and develop new gene and cellular therapies. Founder Randy Yurden grew up in Sandy Creek, went to Syracuse University, and eventually invented a machine that did something that had never been done before. It replicates the conditions inside the human body to improve the growth of cultured stem cells. How often do you think he heard the words foolhardy, no, or impossible. And yet just a few short years ago, Randy stood in a hospital in Illinois as doctors removed a human trachea from one of his machines, a machine that grew stem cells from a little girl's bone marrow into an organ that she was literally born without, an organ that her body was far less likely to reject because it was grown from her own cells. And Randy watched for 9 hours as doctors sewed that trachea in place and gave this child the chance to swallow, taste, speak, and live outside of the ICU. Now, these breakthroughs are all around us, in our work, in our lives, and we can learn important lessons from all of them. As a parent, I get a front row seat to what a curious, ambitious human being is capable of every day. Ben turned 5 last week. The pace at which he learns is simply amazing. Several months ago, my wife began to teach Ben chess, which is great. I love to play. At first, we played with just a few pieces, pawns and a queen, but within weeks, he had full command of the movements. For a few weeks, our games, they followed this predictable format. His knights, his favorite piece, so the knights would jump out, hop all over the board. The pawns would advance. A full frontal assault would be launched. It was chaotic, fast-paced, and just fun. And one day, on our second game of the morning, Ben's body language changed. Instead of laying sprawled out on the floor, he sat up, legs crossed, eyes focused on the board, not on his pieces, but on mine. His pace became deliberate, and as he inched a pawn within striking distance of my queen, he literally could not contain a little giggle. Now, like any parent, I know Ben. I know when he's up to something nefarious. But it still took me a moment to figure out that he was actually baiting my queen to take that pawn on a square that he could strike with his knight. I personally was dumbfounded in that moment. He was thinking ahead. He had a vision in his mind of what he wanted to accomplish, and he was figuring out how to make that happen. He was resisting the instant gratification of attacking somewhere else on the board in search of a bigger prize. And he understood, even if only subconsciously, that sometimes the things we view as deficits, in this case the loss of a pawn, are actually incredible assets that can be harnessed in pursuit of a greater good. These are what breakthroughs are made of. That vision and long-term thinking can be seen in our region's audacious effort to establish Central New York as a hub of technology and manufacturing development for unmanned systems. Here we're advancing the capabilities to enable this industry's next breakthroughs, from improving disaster recovery efforts to delivering your Amazon package. In the last 6 months alone, we have brought one of the industry-leading conferences to Central New York. We've announced the development of a 50-mile, only one of its kind in the world testbed, 50-mile testbed between Syracuse and Rome, and launched the world's largest technology accelerator program that the Lieutenant Governor mentioned, Genius New York, right here in the Syracuse Technology Garden. And we are just getting started. Now that asset-based thinking, that can be seen is inherent in our community's approach to combating the scourge of poverty and neighborhood blight, where programs like Upstart teach underserved entrepreneurs, particularly women and minorities, how to turn their personal talents into successful businesses. Or programs like Work Train, where we engage with neighborhood-based partners to directly target job training for careers in healthcare and manufacturing to parts of our labor force that have often been ignored. Or where the hidden buying power of one of our most impoverished neighborhoods is identified, marketed, and used to recruit a new grocery store to an existing food desert right here in our community. Now, these characteristics of breakthrough moments and ideas are powerful. but they are also what is missing from so much of the criticism of one of this community's most hotly debated topics: local government modernization. For 3 years, a group of highly respected civic volunteers from every sector of our community studied, analyzed local government structures, conducted their work openly and transparently, and engaged directly with the public and our elected officials at every level, offering opportunity for input, criticisms, and alternatives at every stage. Now, I don't know about you, but I was certainly prepared for pushback when Consensus released its final report this year with a recommendation to create a new metropolitan government to lead our community forward. Change on any scale is hard, right? But change on the scale of metropolitan government? Astoundingly difficult. But what I wasn't prepared for was the immediate dismissiveness, the blatant mistruths, and the unbridled antipathy in the response to the Commission's vision. It's dead on arrival, one leader said, almost instantaneously. It would abolish or dissolve the city, we were warned. Simple word search of the document would tell you that's not true. Page 48, there's one mention in the entire document of the word abolish in relation to village courts. Or dissolve, page 33, one mention in the entire report in relation to the Village of East Syracuse Police Department. It would doom Syracuse to eternal poverty, we were told. Despite the fact that our dubious distinction of having the highest concentration of poverty among African Americans and Hispanics of any city in America is a current condition that is in part a product of the choices made inside our current systems of government. It didn't address schools, became a popular refrain. And candidly, that's a valid criticism. But in the 9 weeks since Consensus recommended the creation of a second commission for the sole purpose of performing a similar analysis on our school districts, only 2 of those many critics have stepped forward to volunteer their time and their expertise, their creativity, and their resources on a schools commission. There won't be any savings, some have said. Despite the fact that one single merger of one single service in one single town, the Town of Clay police merger, has saved taxpayers more than $12 million over 7 years. In fact, Consensus estimates that we could save up to $33 million a year, an amount equivalent to the entire city of Syracuse property tax levy. Now, how many economic and social and community challenges could we reimagine as assets with $330 million to spend over the next decade? But no one wants this. That was said, despite the fact that Consensus received more than 11,000 comments during one of the most extensive public engagement efforts our community has seen in recent years, since those that Honeywell launched on the lake 15 years ago. Some were critical, to be sure, but thousands were favorable, and both public and private polling shows far more support for the idea than many would have you believe. But 500 elected and appointed officials in the county stand unified in opposition to this plan. I can only thank the opposition for making our point so eloquently. And then there was this. This effort was designed to strip our city of its assets. After all, it happened before, didn't it? We've had assets like our lake ripped away from us. So that fear is easy to resurface. No, no, no. Now, you would think that the tone and tenor of that discussion might be discouraging, but frankly, I find it refreshing, energizing, in fact, because it means our passions have been aroused, because it means we are trying to do something hard but necessary. and because it means that we are talking about issues that need to be confronted openly and transparently. Like the fact that our current way of doing things has given us nearly 50 years of zero population growth, and we must do better. Or that our current system allows legislative districts to be drawn by politicians in ways that do not represent their respective communities and perpetuate political as opposed to policy outcomes. And we must do better. Or that our current system underrepresents minorities in elected office at every level of local government. And we must do better. Or that our city government is proposing to spend $18.5 million of its rainy day fund to fill a structural hole in the budget that will leave our next mayor with less than 2 years of runway and no plan for the future. And we must do better. Or that we cling to a system of micro-local governments that allows a village mayor to be elected this year with 13, yes, 13 votes. We must do better. And yes, as has been raised, that our schools face massive fiscal and racial inequities, and that our current system of land use planning and zoning concentrates poverty. And we must do better. The 19 members of the Consensus Commission have offered a vision that would make Syracuse the second largest city in New York State, do away with partisan districting, bring government representation closer to the people, and build a future from a position of shared purpose and shared responsibility. And that vision is absolutely achievable. There's been speculation that the resistance to the idea of allowing the public to vote and express themselves in a public referendum is so strong because those in power are afraid that it might actually succeed, that the voters, our citizens, might actually choose to reject the establishment that has perpetuated a tired but politically effective us versus them narrative. I actually have a different theory. I wonder how many of those that have been fighting the hardest against it are actually afraid it will fail at the ballot box. And then, in the absence of a vision for a modern metropolitan approach to our future, the people will turn to their leaders and ask them the obvious question. If not this, then what? Because for all the criticisms, how many constructive alternatives have been offered? How many different visions for our community have been put forward that look beyond the immediate gratification of today and think carefully about tomorrow? Instead, they tell you it's impossible, that it can't be done, that it won't be done, that it will not happen in our lifetime. We've heard this all before, haven't we? And yet take a step back and look at all that we have accomplished together, even when it was hard. Back in 1997, Chucky Holstein and Focus Greater Syracuse worked tirelessly to engage our community in a robust civic discourse that resulted in an articulation of 87 priorities needed to create economic opportunity and transform our regional economy. Through her tireless efforts and the efforts of the community members she empowered, the fruits of that labor of love and civic engagement process have finally come into, forgive me, focus over a 20-year lens. Hundreds of citizens championed the idea of community scholarships for our high school students. And today we have a fully funded Say Yes to Education program that will provide free tuition for every future graduate of the Syracuse City School System who gets accepted to college. Others ask that the Landmark Theater get a second chance at life. And not only is the Landmark now hosting month-long traveling productions like The Lion King, but we didn't stop there. We gave them a restored Hotel Syracuse, despite the chorus of skeptics who wanted to see that decrepit eyesore torn down. A hospital for children, they said, would be a good idea. And our community came together and did something magical. They asked us to do more to preserve historic buildings. So we literally changed state law and gave New York the most aggressive historic preservation tax credit in the country, a tax credit that has paid great dividends for Syracuse and our entire region. They pleaded with us to put the appropriate attention to making downtown economically vibrant and livable. And no one can argue with the success that we have had. Downtown and the lakefront are the fastest growing census tract in central New York, and our downtown residential occupancy rate is still holding strong at 99%. They encouraged our government leaders to modernize city and county government. Imagine that. Improve customer service in government offices, increase citizen involvement in government, create new sources of government income besides taxes, merge city, county, village, and police departments, and more. And we have not forgotten, and we will not stop. And Chucky Holstein and those who brought their ideas forward as concerned citizens dared, back in 1997, to envision a day when Onondaga Lake was restored to its place as a community asset. And here we are with that dream within reach. Through the long lens of history, the story of Onondaga Lake will be one of triumph. Not a story absent its share of tragedy, mind you, but one of a vision that transcended time and politics, where the voices of a small few, pioneers like Sam Sage and Steve Effler, became the voices of many, became a movement, where science and data and facts eventually broke through the resistance and ideology, where a community persisted despite great odds. None of these things happen without disagreement, nor did any one person or organization achieve them alone. In moment after moment, the chasm between our vision and success might have seemed deep, but in the end, the voice of the people prevailed. Those who shared a vision, who were willing to look upon our deficits not as faults, but as assets waiting to be uncovered or rediscovered, and who resisted the need for immediate gratification in pursuit of a bigger prize. In this moment of self-reflection, it is time to remind ourselves who we are and what we are capable of. Time to reorient the very way we look at ourselves, not as a community hiding from its past, but as a city and region with hope for the future, as a true metropolitan region anchored not solely by its institutions, but by the same things that anchor the strongest and most iconic cities of the world: its history, its culture, its people, its natural assets, which do not belong to any one of us, nor to our city, or our county, or our towns, or our villages. They belong to us all. So to those who say we can't, I say simply, we have, we must, and we will. Thank you very much.